educational reform a need for Ghana, unquote. The chair permits me to explain the motion for the benefit of my audience. The motion, according to the Education Strategic Plan, educational reform is the adjustment of education system to context and time, as well as providing clear performance standards to guide teaching and learning. Ladies and gentlemen, over the centuries, education has had different goals and dreams of spreading the gospel to create an elite group to run the country. The House, the chair, in the past years, we have had intellectual leaders who have made education better to date. To mention of John von Richelieu in 1828, Sir Hugh Clifford in 1918, Dr. Pedro Abel in 1894, who engineered the pre-independence educational reforms. The chair, for the purpose of this debate, permits me to remind my audience of the 1957 reform, which was geared towards remodeling the British education. Ladies and gentlemen, it is well known that after this brief history journey on our various reforms, we are saying that educational reform is a necessity for Ghana. The chair, educational reform can operate integration of technology into classrooms, enhancing teaching methods and learning experiences. Ladies and gentlemen, this can include providing computers, internet, connectives, and softwares. The chair, by embracing modern technology, students can improve in their digital skills, which are necessary for this 21st century of ours. The chair, another area we should look out for is the quality of education. Ladies and gentlemen, educational reform can improve the overall quality of education in Ghana. The clear reforms can address the issues of overcrowded classrooms, inadequate qualified teachers personnel, and inadequate resources. The House, by considering in these areas, students will benefit from a nice, conducive learning. The chair, another point I and my team will raise in support of the motion is the inclusivity in education. The chair, educational reform can focus on making education more inclusive, especially for children with disabilities, girls in rural areas. The chair, reforms can facilitate equal access to education for all, ensuring that no child is left behind. This can help bridge the educational gap and can contribute to fair and equitable society. Falaa of Judges permits me to tender this evidence for your perusal, a research paper on promoting inclusive education in Ghana. Beauty K and Co. highlighted some key reforms for government to promote inclusive education. For examples, girls are allowed to go back to school even when they are pregnant. The chair, the House. My last but not the least point for supporting the motion is vocational training. Vocational training aspects. The chair, educational reform can place greater emphasis on vocational training and skill development. The House, this can help address the issue of high unemployment rate among the youth. The chair, by offering practical skills training, students can acquire relevance, making them more employable and ultimately contributing to the economic growth of the country. The chairperson, impartial panel of judges, accredited timekeepers, co-debaters, fellow students, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, educational reform are necessary for Ghana to address the quality of education and equip students with the skills needed for the future. The chair, by embracing technology, inclusivity, and vocational training, Ghana can transform its education system and to contribute to the development of its society and the economy of Ghana. Thank you.
guests, average timekeeper, co-debaters, fellow students, ladies and gentlemen, good day. I am Patience Osua, a student of Basin Institute Senior High School. I rise strongly as the principal speaker against the motion. I quote, educational reforms, a need for Ghana, unquote. The chair, permit me to define some keywords in the motion to benefit my audience. According to Wikipedia, educational reform refers to the goal of changing public education in terms of educational theory and practice. Need simply means to require or demand something. Therefore, the motion simply means that there is a requirement for changes and improvement in the educational system of Ghana. To start with, Mr. Chairman, educational reform may lead to financial burden on the government. Implementing educational reform often requires significant financial investment that constrain the country's resources. The chair, an example is the free SHS program. Though it has significantly increased access to education for many Ghanaian students, the cost of providing free education has strained the country's resources and potentially affected other areas of public spending. In observation, Mr. Chairman, free education has contributed to high cost of living due to the country's financial burden on free SHS. It has left the government no option but to increase taxes on products and therefore leading to high inflation rate, causing the increasement of prices of products. The chair, Mr. Chairman, some years ago, we were able to take 100 cedis to the market to get a number of provisions, but now 100 cedis cannot afford anything better. The chair, permit me to ask my opponent a question. Is something that makes us cry? Is something that makes us cry and also wipe our tears wet for? Is there a need for this? Furthermore, Mr. Chairman, educational reform may affect the quality of education. For instance, the free SHS program increased enrollment of students, which stressed the capacity of teachers, leading to the reduction in attention per student. Also, Mr. Chairman, nowadays, even students with aggregate 54 can enter the free SHS program, can enter the senior high school, all in the name of the free SHS program. Now, almost all students from the basic level enter SHS, neglecting our technical and vocational education and training, and as a result, we lose our ability and skill. The chair, I would like to ask my opponent a question. If educational reform cannot enhance quality education, then what is the essence of it? Again, Mr. Chairman, educational reform can hinder resource allocation. Implementing large-scale reform requires significant financial and human resources. Instead of directing these resources towards enhancing existing educational practices or addressing challenges could lead to more targeted improvements, such as provision of schools, provision of libraries, construction of good roads, provision of electricity, and provision of good drinking water. The chair, I would like to ask my opponent a question. How can something that reduces resource allocation be relevant for Ghana? Also, Mr. Chairman, educational reform have made local autonomy centralized. Educational reform centralizes decision-making power over educational policies. This reduces local communities' ability to shape education according to their specific needs. The chair, I would like to cite this example where our educationists brought up this policy. Ban of corporal punishment, specifically no caning in schools. The chair, Mr. Chairman, gone were the days our great-great-grandfathers were being caned for some misconduct and then when they want to implement some form of learning into students. Here is the case they have clipped teachers' hands and feet in terms of addressing discipline. In terms of discipline, Mr. Chairman, this is not helping the students. Why am I saying this? Mr. Chairman, without these things, shaping of student behavior becomes very difficult. Because the student feels that there is no caning, so they can do whatever they like, while teachers keep watching. Meanwhile, if decision making was to be handled by the local community, they would have known the specific needs of students and addressed it as such. The chair, centralized autonomy is really a bad influence of educational reform. Hence, we don't need any educational reform. Again, Mr. Chairman, educational reform is time constrained. Implementing widespread reform can be time-consuming and may drive away attention from immediate educational needs. Mr. Chairman, an example is the new An example is a new curriculum program designed in 2018, which has taken years for its complete implementation. It is more surprising to note that since its implementation, there hasn't been provision of textbooks for it. Teachers have to go through stress and spend some amount in order to get textbooks and teaching resources for a smooth teaching and learning. Also, Mr. Chairman, the full concentration of such programs has driven attention from immediate educational needs of a child and teachers. Moreover, Mr. Chairman, educational reform may lead to an unstable educational system. Frequent changes in curriculum without appropriate planning and training can disrupt education consistently. Students may also face difficulties adapting to new content regularly. The Chair, permit me to ask my opponent a question. How can an educational system provide consistent and effective learning experience if it constantly undergoes significant changes? In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, panel of judges, distinguished guests, accurate timekeeper, co-debaters, fellow students, ladies and gentlemen, the points that I've raised so far are: educational reform may affect the quality of education in Ghana. Educational reform may lead to financial burden on the government. Educational reform leads to centralized autonomy. Educational reform may lead to time constraints. Educational reform may lead to unstable educational system. From the above stated points, I hope you agree with me that we don't need educational reforms now, but the existing ones should rather be strengthened and follow them to the latter. Therefore, I restate my stance against the motion. I quote, educational reforms and need for Ghana, unquote. Thank you.
Chairperson, infrastructure of judges, accurate timekeepers, co-debaters, fellows, ladies and gentlemen, good day. Representing Akumasa in Senior High School, I am Blessed Nanaje, right? Raising before this August House as the first opportunity speaker, speaking in favor of the motion which I put, educational reform is the need for Ghana. The Chair, before I confidentially write my point to support my principal speaker, I would like to clear the dust that has been thrown into the eyes of the audience. The Chair, my opponent here with me today, we're saying that there is implementation challenge. The Chair, there is a saying that if you think education is a space, then try ignorance. The Chair, since the point thrown to the eyes of the audience have been said, I would like to add up my point by starting with the need for education in teacher training and professional development. The Chair, teacher training and educational reform in teacher training and professional development program can help teacher training, can help enhance quality of teaching and also ensure that educators are well equipped with pedagogical skills needed to enhance quality and engaging lessons. The Chair, well-trained teachers can inspire students to learn and excel academically. In addition, educational reform can also bring about global competitiveness. Educational reform can position Ghana as a competitive player in the global market. The Chair, by aligning Ghana education system with international standards, Ghanaian schools will be able to prepare better for the globally, academically and professionally. The Chair, this will attract foreign investors, promote innovation and stimulate economic growth. The Chairperson, infrastructure panel of judges, accurate timekeepers, co-debaters, fellows, ladies and gentlemen, I hope the point raised about is convincing enough for you to rally with me to speak in favor of the motion which I put. Educational reform and for that. Thank you.
Oh, please clap for him. Wow. Let's clap for him.
The Chair, panel of judges, accurate timekeeper, distinguished guests, co-debaters, fellow students, ladies. The Chair, panel of judges, accurate timekeeper, distinguished guests, co-debaters, fellow students, ladies and gentlemen. I am Imanda Amaba, a proud student of Asim Senior School and the first supporting speaker against the motion, educational reform, a need for Ghana. The chair, it must be pointed out that we are against educational reforms in general, but we are against any attempt to introduce any new educational reform as something needful. The chair, we have had a number of educational reforms before and after independence. The notable one among them are: 1. The 1951 Accelerated Development Plan for Education. 2. The 1961 Free Fair Universal Primary Education. 3. Free supply of textbooks. 4. The 1974 educational reforms which piloted the introduction of JSS Comfort. 5. The 1987 educational reform of JSS. 6. The 2018 educational reform. 7. And currently the 2018 educational reform. The chair, in all these, how many of them have been followed to respect to their aim objectives? For instance, the 1987 educational reform. This was supposed to equip students with reform. This was supposed to equip students with necessary technical and vocational skills and self-defense. Even if we decided not to further case or education, but what do we see? What has happened to our vocational and technological? What is the meaning of doing good there? But what do we see? It was introduced without the necessary logistics and resources to implement the program. Even the recent 2018 educational reform put premium on technological and vocational institutions, popularly known as TVET. The chair, it is the same thing in the 1987 reforms intended to achieve. What is new about this? The presupposes that we do not need educational reform currently, but improve upon the already existing ones. Again, the chair, what is the use of introducing educational reform without any resources? Ghana is said to be a country of nature. Ghana is said to be a country of larger resources. But what do we see? Most of our resources are inadequate. For example, when we come to senior high school, the new Form 1, they are not having inadequate textbooks to even learn or to study. They are not having exercise books. Even their school uniforms are not in. So how are we going to improve? How are we going to improve those things? The chair. Moreover, the chair, educational reform is a theory, learning, and examination focus. In Ghana, it is said that if you fail your exam, there is no way you are going to make it in life. If you fail your exam, there is no way you are going to make it in life. Now, the students have tended to be chill and poor. They have always been learning and be pouring out each and every time of examination. But after that, they will forget. Also, because they don't want to fail, also they partake in examination malpractices, which is something very bad and is not happening in our country. The chair, educational reform puts stress on teachers and students. Educational reform has become something that makes students very frustrating and teachers very not defined for even someone to profession his or herself into. For example, a teacher can teach for almost 2 hours without even a break, which makes the learners very, very difficult for them to also comprehend with what the teacher is teaching. The chair, educational reform also sometimes become very, very frustrating to both teachers and learners. That's an example is a review of 2008 reform which changed the previous 3 years secondary school into a 4-year program costing the education system. In conclusion, the chair, panel of judges, accurate timekeeper, distinguished guests, co-debaters, fellow students, ladies and gentlemen, the points that I have so far raised are: 1. Educational reform could be incompetence. 2. Educational reform is a theory, learning, and examination focus. 3. Educational reform puts stress on teachers and students. 4. Educational reform is a lack of resources to implement the educational reform. 5. Inconsistency in educational reform. Therefore, I restart my stance against the motion. Educational reform, a need for Ghana. Thank you.
Good chair, people shop and all judges, a quick timekeeper, code debaters,
co-debaters, fellow students, the chairperson, the impartial panel of judges, accurate timekeeper, co-debaters, fellow students, ladies and gentlemen, greetings to you all. Representing Yakumasa and Senior High School, I am Emanuela Anajiman, rising before this against us as a summarizer, speaking in favor of the motion. I quote, educational reform and need for Ghana, unquote. The chair, my coming here is not to circumlocute, but reiterate all the points that my principal speaker and first supporting speaker raised. My principal speaker here mounted this podium, declared his stance and gave 5 solid convincing points backed by corresponding evidences. Also, my first supporting speaker came out the stage, declared his stance and rebutted some superficial statements ignorantly raised by our opponents. The chair, ignorantly raised by my opponents. They share the house. In their submission, they are saying there is a need for reform in Ghana's education. Firstly, for embracing technology. Secondly, to improve the quality of education. The third point, because the curricula is outdated. The fourth point, to bring about inclusive education. Also, which is the fifth point, to improve vocational training. Sixthly, to bring about global competitiveness. And the last point, to conclude, there is a need for educational reform in order so that it will focus on teacher training and professional development. The chair, we are saying educational reform is a need for Ghana. We are saying educational reform. The chair, I quote, we are saying educational reform is a need for Ghana. With all these cogent points and evidences, we employ you to embark on this facilitating journey and speak firmly for the relevance of educational reform in Ghana. The chair, with this, we are convinced beyond doubt that you bear with us that, I quote, educational reform is a need for Ghana, unquote.
Let's clap for him.
The chair, panel of judges, accurate timekeeper, distinguished guests, co-debaters, fellow students, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Christopher Adunbiri Abimbora, a proud student of Asili Senior High School and a second supporting speaker against the motion. I quote, educational reform, a need for Ghana, unquote. To add up, Mr. Chairman, political influence on educational reform. Political influence on educational reform can have negative outcome and lead to unnecessary changes in the education system. One example of this is the No Child Left Behind Act in the United States. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, panel of judges, accurate timekeeper, distinguished guests, co-debaters, fellow students, ladies and gentlemen, the points my colleagues raised so far are educational reform may lead to financial burden and the government. Educational reform may affect the quality of education in Ghana. Educational reform hinder resource allocation. Educational reform leads to centralized autonomy. Educational reform is time constraint. Educational reform may lead to unstable educational system. Educational reform could be incompetence. Educational reform is theory-laden and examination focused. Educational reform puts stress on teachers and students. Lack of resource and implement an educational reform. Political influence on educational reform. Incompetencies in educational reform. Thus, in view of all these convincing points as against the weak ones raised by my already defeated opponents, there is no doubt as to which side has emerged victorious. I therefore call on all and stand to join the winning team to oppose the motion. I quote, educational reform, a need for Ghana, unquote. Thank you.
Those in quarantine Let's call them in. But before they come, let's give our first batch of contestants a big round of applause. Before that one. So I think they will rejoin their colleagues and as the second batch